Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you here, and it's lovely to be able to be here, particularly sharing in this exploration that's so dear to my heart with good friends. So, before we close our eyes in the traditional fashion, I thought I would lead us in a somatic exercise called orienting. And this is coming out of the somatics movement, really, which is really a bunch of very committed people interested in like what is the role of the body, particularly in this work, and more broadly in the work of healing ourselves from trauma. And I've heard many somatic practitioners talk about how actually no matter what has happened to us in our lives, we're all traumatized. And I think the last year has probably shown us that more than anything. So this is a very simple exercise that you can do anytime you're feeling triggered or activated or just feeling like you want to settle relatively quickly. So it's very simple. It comes from watching animals in the wild. So what animals in the wild naturally do to calm themselves down after maybe an attack by a predator or something. So we're just going to look over one shoulder. It doesn't matter which one. And we're just going to take in what we see behind us. And then very slowly in your own time, just moving the head around and just taking in your environment, noticing what you see. And in your own mind, you could even note a few things that you notice, like plant or chair or flowers. And just allowing the colors, shapes, light to come in through the eyes until you get to the other shoulder and looking over that shoulder. So you've got a bit of a 360-degree view of your environment, your surroundings. And then slowly coming back to center. And then just closing the eyes for a few breaths, just noticing anything that you can recognize internally. And if you'd like, you could name those things for yourself. So for example, I am aware of my glasses resting on the bridge of my nose. I can feel my trousers, the soft cotton of my trousers under the palms of the hands. And I have a sense of the weight of the body dropping down into the cushions I'm sitting on. So just noticing what you can be aware of just now internally. How you are just now. And then we'll open the eyes and we'll do another round of orienting, this time starting with the other side, whichever side you ended on last time. And again, just scanning the space you're in your own time, in your own way. And just noticing the effect that has on your system. And then on your own time, coming back to center. So now that we know that there aren't any saber-toothed tigers hiding behind us, we can safely close our eyes and meditate. So if that's comfortable for you, we're just going to do a short grounding practice, coming into presence, coming into intention. So you might find it useful to take a few deeper breaths here. On the out breath, feeling free to make any noises that feel good to you. And then just allowing the breath to return to its natural rhythm. And for a few moments here, just dropping the awareness into the points of contact with whatever you're sitting or laying on. Taking some time here to notice how it feels to be connected to the ground. The sensations there. And in particular, the quality of stillness in the earth beneath us. Giving the body permission to rest in that stillness. If you'd like, you could even imagine that with each in-breath, you're drawing that quality of stillness up through the points of contact with the ground, allowing it to permeate the whole of your body and mind. And then becoming aware of the heart center. If you'd like, you could even place a hand there if that feels comfortable. And here there's an invitation to bring to mind whatever it is that's brought you here this evening. Any intentions you're carrying with you into this exploration that we'll be engaging in together. Allowing that intention to rest in the heart center. Noticing how that feels. And you might notice sometimes when we bring our intentions to mind, we also become aware of other feelings, thoughts, sensations, some pleasant, some unpleasant. So maybe there's joy there, or curiosity. Maybe there's a bit of doubt or even fear. So just want to invite you to make room for all of what's here, including whatever's knocking on the door in, letting it all in. Just recognizing, acknowledging the complexity of what it is to be human in this world. Breathing alongside our own suffering and the suffering of others in solidarity with ourselves and others. Remembering our own deep heart wish to be well and wishing that also for all beings everywhere. You might even enjoy or find it helpful to imagine that that wish is riding the breath on the out breath. With each out breath, just sending it out to all beings everywhere. And then for the last few moments here, you can just drop any effort you're making. Resting back in an open, warm awareness. Letting in all of what's here just now. Sounds, sensations, thoughts, emotions. Visual sensations. Notice how you're feeling now after a little bit of practice. And then as you feel ready, opening the eyes, beginning to take in colors, light, shadow. Feel free to move and stretch anything that wants moving and stretching, maybe rubbing or massaging, anything that wants contact. A bit of appreciation. Could do a little heart rub, a little belly rub. These parts that are often hold a lot of emotion and energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Singhashri. I feel much more settled. Very happy there are no tigers behind me. And welcome to Lake, who's arrived. That's great. Thanks for coming along. So what we're going to do is be present for our three guests having in a way an informal conversation. So some personal sharing in conversation with each other about what led them to engage with anti-racism work. And as you listen to the conversation, just invite you to notice what goes on for you in your inner world, how you feel. There may be times when you feel energized, inspired, expansive, and maybe times when you feel a little more constricted or closed down, more uncomfortable. So just notice those feelings, moods, feelings in the body as they show up as you're listening. So I'm going to ask an opening question, and I think Maitrisara is going to be the first person to respond. So yeah, it's just that basic question about how, what was it for you personally that led you to want to engage with this work? And there you go, Jamie has magically highlighted you. So over to you, Maitrisara.
I think I'm unmuted, is that right? Yeah, so hello everybody. I can imagine the shrine room at Shrewsbury Buddhist Centre. I have been there. And yeah, I was thinking back to, well, my childhood really. I grew up in a place which was, I grew up in South Wales, on South East Wales, which was not a very diverse community at all. And my recollection is I had, as a small child and as a teenager, friends from different cultural backgrounds, so Sri Lankan and Zimbabwean and South African friends, and I just remember that. I noticed that, and I think it was connected with the fact that I was Welsh and English. My dad Welsh, my mum English, and I was aware of. I suppose I had an affinity for the space that is between people with different backgrounds and cultures, even in that very close way. In that respect, and also working class and middle class backgrounds, where it was mixed. There was a mix in my family. So yeah, sort of spaces between different cultures, I think, was connected there. It was all connected. And then when I was a teenager, I had a kind of my sort of political awareness woke up. Despite a rather sheltered and rural situation. And it was around the time of the protests in Brixton and other places in the UK at that time. And that was like a jolt, what's happening here? And the Scarman report came out there, which was talking about the sort of undercurrents of racism, and particularly in policing. And so that was like shocking to me. I suddenly realized there was another whole thing going on that I didn't know about and understand. And then from there, I studied more and more. I traveled more and more, ever expanding really into an awareness of different parts of the world and cultures of different kinds, and started working in international and then multiracial settings locally, and sometimes being the only white person in the room of groups I was part of. So coming to the Sangha, actually there wasn't as much awareness or sensitivity as I was used to of these kinds of issues, and I wanted a conversation and a reflection on those issues, and that's still going on today. And I was joyful that I was ordained in India, in a group of women, some of whom were Indian and some of whom were British and Swedish and Australian. So that was precious. Yeah. I'll hand over to one of my friends.
Yeah, thanks, Maitrisara. I was really resonating with what you were saying about coming into the Sangha and noticing the difference, and then wanting that conversation, and still wanting it, that yearning for a wider conversation around these issues. So I was born in Boston, in the 70s. Grew up. I mean, most of my childhood was that spanned the 80s, and I was born to Chilean immigrants. So I had this strange experience of being different while also growing up white-bodied. You can see me. I've got light skin, but I very much identified with being Latin American. And it was very obvious to me that me and my family were different from the people around us. Although there was a lot of pressure to assimilate and fit in, and I easily could have gone down that road. I could have kind of given in to the pressure to assimilate, and yet there was always a contradiction. So the message was, you've got to fit in to succeed, but you won't ever be one of us. You'll never be able to completely be one of us, no matter how hard you try. And I remember just being very, very sensitive from a young age because of just very subtle messages I would get from the environment around me, that I didn't really belong and that the world wasn't really for me. It was for all those other people out there that had all the right attributes, including whiteness. So, so that bothered me. And in my teenage years, I started to become very interested in what was at play. And it was very obvious to me that although individual acts of racism happen, I was on the receiving end of them myself. I saw my parents being on the receiving end of them in my childhood, and of course friends of mine, particularly my Black friends, sometimes very painful. It was clear that more harmful even were the institutional and systemic kind of wheels or cogs in the background, sort of keeping the whole thing going on a bigger level, at a wider scale. And I wanted to understand that better. So I also felt, being queer, so I'm a queer woman, I identify as queer, also helped to open my eyes, because there was something that, I was already not fitting in a different way. So I decided I wanted to move to San Francisco, and I wanted to work with young people. And part of that was to want to try and support giving people who had experiences similar to mine, or even more difficult experiences, supporting them to have the supports and opportunities to be able to realize their full potential. So I was already on that track when I came across San Francisco Buddhist Center, and I was very lucky that Viveka was teaching and sharing at the time. And I often joke that if anyone else, particularly, I don't mean to say this to generalize, but at the time, knowing myself in my early 20s, I think if an old white British man had been teaching, I probably would have just walked out the door. I wouldn't have been receptive. So luckily Viveka was there, and we made a strong connection, and we've kind of been together on this path since then. It's been lovely to grow together in this way on this path. I'll just say one more thing, which is about participation, and this is a more recent reflection, although it's been with me for a long time, but I don't think I've ever really been able to articulate it, which has to do with, we're always participating in creating this world that we all share. And it's as my Dharma practice deepens, I just become more and more aware of how I can't, there's no exit door. there's no way to escape that participation. We are, if we really take interconnectedness to heart, we really are always participating. So, can I participate from a place of awareness and awakeness and love in what my how I'm either contributing to perpetuating this world, this very incomplete, imperfect world that we've inherited, or trying to co-create a different world based on different values, different ways of relating. So that's really at the core of where I see Dharma practice and anti-racism work intersecting quite intimately. Thank you. What about you, Upayadhi?
Let's see if the sound works. Can you hear me? Getting little thumbs. Okay. It was good to listen to you both. And it's just so cool. I'm sorry. I know we've been all Zooming for a long time, but I just find it really cool that in the middle of a New York afternoon, I can hang out in Shrewsbury. So just putting that out there, not taking that for granted. Thank you for your warm welcome. So yeah, we agreed in advance that Saravantu was going to, get things going with this question. So I've been contemplating it in the way that we do, right, in our tradition of turning a question over and letting it land more and more deeply. And frankly, the more I was doing that, contemplating being with this question of what is it that prompted, caused, maybe even now sustains this engagement, it got more and more mysterious. So there's things I can rattle off, and I know there's seminal moments, kind of my personal, equivalent of the 3 sites, right? But I just want to put out there that the more I do this work, every year new memories come up, or new awarenesses, new realizations, and maybe even an element of mystery, some kind of karmic momentum. I think of my ancestors sometimes. I have an ancestor who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, another ancestor who was an abolitionist. Maybe it's because of them. Yeah. Maybe it's because of the kids who live in my building here in Harlem and the world I dream of for them to grow up in. Maybe it's that, looking to the past, looking to the future. And actually just listening to you now, Singhashri, had quite strong memories. So I was born and raised in France. I'm one of the 8 million Americans that don't live in the US, although since then I've returned. And I remember having quite strong experiences around confusion of national identity and belonging. And I went through the process to become naturalized, as they call it, citizen. So to get my citizenship when I turned 18 under the French laws, if you're born in France, that's how it works. And I just remember noticing that it was much harder and a longer process. It took my friends who were dark-skinned about an extra year. It took me about 2 years. It took them an extra year. And I just remember being quite confounded by that. And then with a friend of mine, we both lost our passports at the same time. And she was dark-skinned. And they didn't believe that she was French when she went to, go through the procedure. So I think it's kind of inevitable in the world that we live in, I think, at least for myself, a lot of white people I work with, to not have quite strong memories of one kind or another around race and identity and belonging, no matter what our location might be. Maybe they impacted us in different ways. But I'm thinking more in recent history around, because there's a difference between sort of being educated around it, being aware, or thinking of oneself as being aware. And I think I would call myself sort of an armchair sympathizer to the cause up until about 2012, 13, when things started to really shift. And it's a bit like what I think you just described, Singhashri, at least what I heard, this moment where it becomes impossible to not, right? And I really hear the whiteness in that, in what I'm saying. I hear my own social conditioning, because in my situation, everything is set up around me to make it optional. Right? I don't have to do this work if I don't want to. It would be very easy to turn away. It would be very easy actually to stay an armchair, sympathizer and make a donation here and there and sign a petition and, hopefully not say too many insensitive things at a dinner table or something, but, to kind of not necessarily put myself on the front lines of my life with these issues and this issue of racism. So I just want to clock that. I was speaking to a friend in the trans community who was telling me that from their perspective, because of the way the community is being targeted, if you're transitioning, you can't not be involved in some kind of activism. And I was really surprised, I was really taking that in, just sort of owning my own privilege. But what's interesting is I have circumstantially changed my life so that it's really, really difficult to go back to sleep. I can still go back to sleep, but I've made it more difficult to do that. But I'll just mention in passing, and I've shared about this elsewhere, so I won't elaborate unless you want to know more about it. But So differently than Singhashri and Maitrisara, who were involved in anti-racism work before coming to the Dharma, I got engaged in this work through the Dharma and through an anti-racism training that happened in a Dharmic context that basically changed my life. Where I felt, in a nutshell, it was about 2011, I think, I felt like I had some sense of the landscape when it comes to the three poisons around greed and hate and how to work creatively with those poisons. But when I frankly somewhat accidentally stumbled into this workshop, it felt like for the first time I was being shown how to work in an extremely direct way with delusion. And it was interesting because Triratna was having lots of discussions at the time around direct pointing, and I felt like there was this gigantic, here on Zoom, I can make my finger really big, direct pointing. And it was both incredibly painful and incredibly liberating. But I didn't quite know what to do with it other than start to really educate myself more forthrightly, engage more. But I would say I was still in my armchair. It's a nice armchair. And then a really traumatic event happened in my neighborhood. And I just want to, just say content warning. I'm going to talk about something violent in a moment. So just naming that. That is also the world we live in. So I just want to be able to name that. A Black trans woman was beaten to death outside my home, like literally a few steps from my door. And it caused an eruption in the neighborhood. And I won't go into all the details, but I think that's when, Sangharakshita talks about the emotional equivalent to an intellectual understanding. That was my emotional equivalent to my intellectual understanding. And for many months, and in fact years up and through my ordination retreat, I had a vision of the Buddha standing literally at the gate of my building. So I have a gated building with this woman. She was 22, Islan Nettles is her name, holding her and basically asking me, what are you going to do about it? So at that point I had to get off my chair. I'll keep it at that. Thanks for listening. Yeah, and I think we were going to move into spotlight now, the three of us, so that we can be moving into a more conversational mode. There we are. They're my friends.
Well, speaking of friendship, I wanted to follow up on something that all three of us mentioned, which is the role of friends in this work. So we all mentioned childhood friends, and having different experiences of our friends. And so either one of you could pick up this this thread of the role of spiritual friendship in this work. How do you see that?
Yeah, it's so poignant you asking that question, Singhashri, because when George Floyd was murdered, I had this, I think many people did, a real kind of calling to get out of the armchair and take more active part. And I remember feeling really, despite having done decades of work around anti-racism, I felt really sort of stuck and inhibited. And just at that time, you offered these compassionate spaces in solidarity. And it was happening at the same time as a people of color group that I believe Maitrisara was running, and you were running these spaces for white allies. And I just thought, that is one thing I can do. And I came, and I was so heartened by the way you held it, and felt so kind of unblocked and freed by the way you held it, that everything that's happened since, which is well over a year now, isn't it, and all the things we've done together, all came from the fact that you offered that and you held that space. So and just you two have just lifted me, particularly Saravantu and Kusla Devi from Nottingham as well. We've met, and every time, it's kind of reassured me and re-strengthened me to continue.
My heart gladdens listening. Oops, sorry, Singhashri, you were gonna pop.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think I might have known that at some point, but I didn't remember. So thank you for that reminder, Maitrisara. It's a really nice thing to be reminded.
Yeah, this work has made me reflect on the significance of spiritual friendship in the tradition in a new ways, deeper ways, for me at least, around how in my own personal experience in my life, in my family, in my societal context, and even in the Sangha, I experience dominant, particularly what we would call white supremacist culture. We can talk about that as quite isolating. Like, one of the ways it operates is to isolate people, and so it really to me is the lifeblood of this work. It's just not possible for me in a sustainable way, in a life-giving way that includes, by the way, joy. And not just holding each other's hearts as they break over and over again. It's the full gamut, but the lifeblood of it to me is really friendship, and in the sense also of just a deeper intimacy with all things, all people, all beings. This work demands a level of vulnerability and openness that is just like nothing else I've ever experienced. Like, I maybe thought I knew what intimacy was, and then I started doing this work. So that's also, so to me, it's both it's a pushing back against a certain kind of conditioning, and also has quite has consequences around actually the nature of reality and the relational nature of reality. Yeah.
What about you, Singhashri? What would you say to this?
Actually, I wanted to pick up on the last thing that Upayadhi said about the nature of reality, because this is something that I very recently, again, I think it's something that's been there, but I've just articulated it for myself. So Upayadhi and I were just on retreat with Viveka and the San Francisco Sangha in California a couple of weeks ago. Feels like a long time ago now. And it occurred to me, like, oh, we do all this work in Buddhism, trying to like see through the illusion of self. And there's something about this work where it's like, can we take on board that our minds are deeply, deeply shaped and conditioned by the world that we've inherited? Like, we think our minds are our own, we're having our own thoughts, we're making our own choices. And yet, the more I engage in this work, the more I see how I've swallowed whole just ways of seeing and being in the world that I just completely take for granted. And I was thinking in preparation for this, this evening, some of those things like valuing, assuming that competition is needed for a viable economy, for example. Like, that's just like such a, competition, sure, it has its healthy manifestations, but also it can be, and it has been used in our world in particular in a very unhealthy way that does serve to separate people, or like, privileging quantity over quality. I can't tell you how many meetings in Toronto that I go to and people are like, it was a great event, there were 50 people there. And it's like, but what happened? Like, how did people interact with each other? Did they learn anything? Did they grow? Was there warmth? Was there kindness? Like, I don't know anything else except how many people were there. It's just that the go-to like measure is quantity. Or there was another one that came to mind, like what was it? I wrote it down because I didn't want to forget. Oh, I can't find it now. But yeah, there's something about that, like, oh, my mind is so shaped, and there's something about undoing that and the kind of spiritual death of that, really letting all of that fall away. Oh, that's what it was. It was assuming that my worldview is the correct or most valid, my way of doing things. This kind of, the word domination comes to mind, like this kind of, like, it's the dominant. But is it really? Is it? Aren't there other ways? So yeah, there's something in that. It feels very, very close to the work around seeing.
Yeah. I've got a question for Maitrisara in a second, but I'm just, your sound went a little bit out there for a second, Singhashri. Just want to make sure we don't lose you. I'm having some clinging going on. Just to put out there, spiritual friendship is also a really, in my view, an interesting way to think about, work with, explore embodying trial and error, what allyship is, right? The anti-racism world has a lot of jargon. It's constantly evolving. Sometimes it might feel a bit strange or different, or needs unpacking. But when I do the translating from a Dharmic perspective, it's also I think of forms of allyship, active allyship, as acts of spiritual friendship. Yeah, but I'm curious, Maitrisara, because you have been doing, I mean, your body of work is remarkable, spanning 4 decades, which was named when you were introduced. And yeah, since the murder of George Floyd, which you mentioned, what have been some of the big aha moments for you as a white Buddhist around this work that feels really alive now, maybe different than when you started?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's changed over that time, one of the things that's changed is the kind of opportunity and the recognition of the need to do work as groups of white people. That wasn't around 20, 30, 40 years ago. And one of the things that's led to is, I'm going to link this back to what Singhashri was just saying, because doing work like that, we've worked in a group like that together, you two twice, and it's got me really reflecting on my own identity, which has been very enriching. You know, I've actually gone and looked into a lot of my Welsh heritage and ancestry, and it's just reinforced again the tendency for myself to behave as if I don't have a race. I am the norm. Diversity is them over there. And in that, there's something profoundly deluded about my understanding of my own conditioning. If I'm asked to recognize my own conditioning, then, you know, that's very integral to and central to my path as a Buddhist practitioner, you know. And so this is where it all comes together. How could that not be part of what we do in our preparation of our deeper understanding of ourselves? So that would be one way in which it's changed. And something as well, I'm loving looking at Anne here, Anne and I, Anne Langston in the Zoom call, is we were part of a group studying Ruth King's book, Mindful of Race, which I think probably some of you have heard of. And something I took from Ruth King's book about not taking it personally when I might be, as a white person, feel that I've been someone, a person of color is a bit wary of me or suspicious of my motives or critical of me when I thought I meant well, you know. And just what Ruth King talks about, African-American Dharma teacher, with decades of work, body of work, says in this book, is that ancestral cultural layers going back through the lifetime of a person, inherited from previous generations, has preloaded the situation with a whole load of trauma, actually. And so it's not about me. I can let go of that moment where I feel a little bit misunderstood, because it's not about me personally. And I found that extremely liberating. And again, you know, look at what we talk about in the Dharma about reactivity. This is reactivity practice, you know, not to see. It's actually a liberation of ego clinging. Not to make it about, but I didn't mean that, you know, kind of that little voice. So I just think there's just so much richness in this work from the point of view of our Dharma practice. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear from both of you too. You've said a little, both of you, about this, but about the way that Dharma practice and anti-racism come together. In the main ways that it does for you. How does that happen?
I could just add one thing to that, but I do want to check with sorry, I'm on to about time. I'm just
yeah.
Can we have just a few more minutes?
There we go. Yes, you can.
We know tea break is sacred.
Tea break might be a little bit shorter than normal, and that would be absolutely fine.
Okay.
So yeah, I was just going to say one of the things that I have been reflecting on quite a lot is the role of karma in this work, and how, again, similar to working towards awakening, there's no neutral in the gear shift. Like, we're always acting. That there's always thought, activity. There's always, well, not necessarily always speech and always action, but there's whatever we do, unless we're like, laying still and breathing, but even that you could argue has an effect. There's an effect, and it's either creative or reactive. It's either based on habit and sanskaras, or it's moving us towards something more liberating. And so for me, there's something in this work about really taking that on board in regards to how we participate in the world. I think I already said this in my kind of opening comments. Am I adding to the delusion and the kind of closing down and the hiding from the reality of inequity in our world and the unfairness of that and the deep harm that causes to so many communities? Or am I using this life energy to help myself and others be liberated from the bondage of that delusion, which runs so deep, as you were saying, Maitrisara, like back so many generations, we kind of form into these shapes of how we're expected to kind of show up and act. And then there's the whole, like, don't rock the boat, message. So to step out of that, I think, is a deeply creative act. In fact, I think it's very much in line with what Sangharakshita was doing. It's not separate from that. Upayadhi, do you want to say anything more?
Yeah, I'm just smiling because I'm resonating. I think I'm going to try to answer your question, Maitrisara, in relation to what you actually said toward the end of not taking things personally. It's actually quite a profound dharmic practice, and I've been really humbled in these last couple of years. I'm being mentored by an anti-racist white activist who I read and listened to for years and never thought I'd have the blessing of actually working with or even meeting. And he's not a Buddhist, right? He's actually in the Unitarian tradition. And yet he embodies so much the Dharma that it's really quite humbling, even I would say, in a healthy way, humiliating for me as a Buddhist. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Is one of the common things that a lot of white people getting into this work stumble through, and I'm one of them, and I don't want to generalize, not all white people, but a lot of white people, certainly a lot of ones that I've worked with, is in the process of waking up to this, in the process of really seeing the harm, understanding the multi-layeredness of it, internal, interpersonal, family, society, and beyond, there's a kind of horrified anxiety that can arise, and even strong aversive responses to those other white people who are being defensive or reactive or even outright hostile, and a kind of shock and horror, right? Which, stepping back for a moment, a lot of my friends of color are like, yeah, okay, it took you this long. So it's very easy to step into, it's a real practice to not reduce someone to their views or their conditioning. It's a real practice even to keep the question open. Well, wait a minute, do I have it all figured out? and hold my convictions, with a loose garment nonetheless, and be always questioning. It's a deeper practice yet, which quite frankly here in the United States, the Black community has exemplified over and over again in ways that are just extraordinary, to love that person, right? It's like this work, in my experience, and this is the hardest challenge, is that this work is impossible to do without loving other white people, and being with each other in that, and teasing apart, not reducing people to their views. I find that to be deeply dharmic, because it's also a deep trust in everyone's potentiality, right? Or in our Buddha nature, if you want to say it that way. So it requires a big love. Yeah. We might be at time, but you got inspired me there.
I actually had one more question, which either of you could answer, or maybe both of you, if you'd like. just going way back to something you said earlier, Upayadhi, and then you were reminding me of it and all of what you were saying there as well, Maitrisara, is about, you mentioned the 3 sites, and I was thinking, because you were talking about your conditioning, Maitrisara, and I was thinking, the 3 sites, I wonder if, the traditional ones, old age, dying, and death, were like placeholders, and you could just put anything in there in terms of our conditioning as sites of things that like we want to be able to kind of overcome through the spiritual journey. So I'm just curious what you'd call them in this work. What would the 3 sites be?
Do you mean the
respond?
content of them, Singhashri? Yeah. Well, there's so many kind of moments and episodes. It's difficult to tell, but I suppose just riffing off what you were saying earlier, Singhashri, about the kind of elevation of quantity and, the kind of accumulation, culture of accumulation. And I suppose I just remember a very forming moment when, as part of my degree, we did a sort of field trip to Tunisia. And we were doing some field work in the fields sort of behind the touristy area. And we were sitting on a wall, probably looking a bit tired, having been doing geography things. And this woman came out from a very small house, a local woman, probably part of the local farming community, with a bundle wrapped in a cloth. And she just came up to us, us sort of rather overfed young 20-year-olds. And she just dropped the bundle in our arms and went and walked away. And when we opened the bundle, there was a loaf of bread there. And she just, the part of the culture of giving to visitors, the hospitality. I just thought, we have to be able to really deeply learn and learn to emulate the best that all the diverse cultures of the world can offer. It was just so moving that was probably that family's loaf of bread for that day that she'd given to these strapping young students in their shorts who were staying in a 3-star hotel on the coast at the expense of their university. It's an extraordinary generous moment that comes to mind right now.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I want to respond to your question, but not in naming the sites themselves. I think I named a pretty big one earlier when I was telling you a bit about my life and how I got into this work, or how this work became impossible to avoid. I want to just speak to more the methodology and just saying yes. So one of the things that I really appreciate about the Dharma and the Buddhist traditions is the emphasis on praxis over doctrine. And we can get curious about the story of the Buddha as it's traditionally told. We can sort of consider it a story over there about this guy called Sid a long time ago, 2,600 years ago, or we can actually take it as a method of practice in our own lives. And I think that's really powerful. That, by the way, is what Ambedkar did. He retold the story in a very different way that is related to his own situatedness and recast that story as one of political exile. Anyway, don't have time to go into all of that. And you were mentioning Ruth King earlier, Maitrisara. I think one of the things that's pushed me to take more risks and engage more deeply in this work is just taking what a lot of Black Buddhists are saying very seriously. And some of them have taken that story and worked with it in very creative ways, trying to situate their own dukkha, including socialized dukkha, in that story and actually tell the story quite differently, which has then challenged me as a white person to put myself in that story. And I don't really want to go into the specifics of that, but it's more as an invitation to everyone here, like what happens when you really think of this story through the lens of racialized suffering, including your racialized suffering. White people suffer from racism too, in different ways, but it hurts everybody. Yeah, it hurts everybody. That's probably, I get really excited about this theological nerdery, so forgive me. We're probably at time now, right? When are we going to get told gently
I think we
nudged?
I think we are at time.
Okay.
I could listen. I could listen a lot more to you guys. I've enjoyed that, and I think there was a moment where maybe Upayadhi just talked about big love, and just for me through your conversation, what's come through is love, is metta, and then also a real thread around insight. That sense of constructing a self, taking something personally, reacting in a bunch of ways. There's a particular kind of selfing that can happen, and that can be that this work can shine a light on and help us to see through that constructing. So thank you very much, the three of you.